Well. They believe that intelligence should appear modest, like someone who is hesitant to come across as overconfident. Then you showed up, and humility began to resemble denial. Something in the air was rewired the instant you spoke. It had nothing to do with volume. The way your words cut through fog rather than danced around it was precise. Before your voice cut through the static, people were unaware of how loud their minds were. Every conclusion you come to feels like it leaps a few centuries ahead, which is why there are whispers, surveillance, and quiet meetings where men in suits ask, how did they figure that out? You anticipate rather than brainstorm. You decode rather than learn. You break down frameworks while others gather data. The architecture of thought itself is traced. When you focus on a pattern, it can reveal an underlying order that others may have perceived as chaotic. They watch you because of this. They refer to you as being too cerebral, too analytical, and too dangerous to misunderstand because of this. They are aware that when you look at something, you see the source code of the environment around it, not just its surface. They explained that intelligence had limitations, similar to a jet's altitude warning. However, until the radar lost you, flew past those coordinates. You now live in a range where even examining your mental processes runs the risk of exposure, and observation turns into interference. They therefore call you intimidating, unpredictable, and unconventional. However, their true meaning is uncontrollable, because something that is aware of its own control mechanisms cannot be enslaved. Clarity has an unsettling quality. Until someone delivers the truth without anesthesia, people yearn for it. You do that. Delusion is amputated without first being numbed. Narratives, corporate scripts, political theater, and personal justifications are all stripped away until only unadulterated architecture remains. People aren't prepared for that. It was intelligent, not clinical, that they desired. Bright, not blinding, was what they want. However, your mind doesn't request authorization. In broad daylight, it autopsies illusions. You never sought their that. Your intelligence was never ornamental. It served as a diagnosis. The way a hacker views antiquated security firewalls is how you view society. It's insulting how simple it is. You can see how dependency is created, where manipulation lurks, and how propaganda spreads. And when you say it out loud, everyone in the room freezes because they know you're not speculating. You're disclosing sensitive psychological information that people weren't supposed to handle so carelessly. That's what scares them. It's weaponized awareness, not academic intelligence. Not only do you resolve issues, but you also reveal underlying agendas. You create psychological x-rays out of casual conversation. Before someone completes a sentence, you can decipher tone, rhythm, motive, and posture. They believed that IQ was all about solving puzzles and identifying patterns. They had no idea that it would develop into behavioral forensics. People's entire personalities seemed transparent once you finished reading them like encrypted files. It was easier for them to call you haughty than to acknowledge that they felt audited. Every conversation you have with them turns into a confession they never agreed to make. You simply know without even asking questions. They can sense that your perception is based on calibration rather than data. You pay attention to changes in frequency, the tremor in a voice that conveys fear, the brief pause before deceit, and the forced laughter that tries to conceal nervousness. You get signals that the majority of brains ignore as noise. Conversations with you drain people because of this. It's because you listen too intently, not because you talk too much. Your awareness crossed the line between tactical analysis and human intuition at some point. You profile then empathize. You evaluate rather than pass judgment. Every little thing turns into a coordinate. Every quiet moment turns into a timestamp. Institutions begin to take notice when you transform perception into reconnaissance. They understand that since intelligence like yours already knows procedure better than those enforcing it, it doesn't need permission. In their system, you were meant to be the student. Rather, you turned into its observer. You observed how educational frameworks are intended to domesticate minds rather than to awaken them. You realize that mediocrity is a mechanism rather than an accident. The average intellect is calibrated for compliance, not underperforming, and the alarms went off when you rejected that calibration. You were outgrowing their system, not failing it. They referred to you as difficult because of this. Your brain broke their whole obedience algorithm, not because you disobeyed. You think differently because you triangulate facts rather than pursue views. You run simulations, compute results, and predict repercussions before responding. It sounds like a top-secret mission briefing from your inner monologue. People confuse your stillness for being cold because of this. They are unaware that stillness at your level is actually processing speed rather than emptiness. You've already run predictive models on how an idea will turn out by the time the majority of people have articulated it. However, there is a drawback to that benefit. It gets increasingly difficult to connect the more you know. Manipulation ruins conversations before they begin because you can spot it so early. It is impossible to act as though you are blind to contradictions. What is concealed in tone cannot be unheard. Your candor turns into a weapon that intimidates people who enjoy ambiguity. I don't mean to be intimidating, but intelligence is accompanied by presence, and presence shatters illusion. Everywhere you go, your subconscious speaks before your mouth. People can tell when someone is looking past their facade. They make grammatical errors, practice sentences twice, and unconsciously edit themselves within your vicinity. They believe that their ideas are being examined for encryption flaws, and it's possible that they are. In actuality, you listen to patterns rather than words. You are adept at handling contradiction, subtext, and the gaps between sentences. That's what makes you different. Your mind decodes intention, while most minds decode language. You reverse engineer behavior rather than interpret it. Every action a person does becomes a clue to their motivation. Deception collapses close to you because of this. Lies are destroyed by your understanding, not by your suspicion. You can see why they lied, how they rationalized it to themselves, and what vulnerability it exposes. You see corruption as a predictable result of faulty architecture rather than as a moral failure. And those whose power relies on opacity are terrified by that. They attempt containment as a result. You overthink things, they say. They make fun of your accuracy until it begins to prove itself. They then become frightened. Because nothing poses a greater threat than someone who consistently acts correctly when they shouldn't. Your insight begins to uncover hierarchies, reorganize alliances, and rewrite stories. Before long, you are the control variable in the conversation rather than a participant. Just by being there, you set the tone. Because you naturally create gravitational fields of awareness, and energy reorganizes around focus. The room's temperature changes when you enter them, not because you are trying to get attention. Every entity, whether individual or institutional, yearns for proximity to intelligence until it realizes that intelligence observes everything. The ignorant orbit you out of curiosity, while the knowledgeable orbit you out of necessity. Then the same people who used to come to you for advice start to fear your memory. They'll claim it's paranoia. They'll claim that nobody is observing you. However, you know deep within that patterns are truthful. Your searches are taken into account by the algorithms. The ads change in response to your ideas. Discussions begin to reverberate with bits of what you only spoke to yourself. You're not dreaming. You've been flagged. Your perception jeopardizes their disguise, not because you are hazardous in action. You speak too clearly, notice too much, and connect too quickly. It's referred to as coincidence. You refer to it as data correlation. So they put you to the test. They send people disguised as puzzles, debates disguised as puzzles, debates disguised as conversations, and diversions disguised as opportunities. Whether it's analytical, emotional, strategic, or spiritual, they want to gauge your level of intelligence. However, they are unaware that it is all of them. You are multidisciplinary by nature and polymathic by necessity. Neural bridges are created when society erects barriers between disciplines. Your reasoning is influenced by psychology. Your analytics are shaped by art. Your ethics are filtered by philosophy. You integrate rather than isolate, and fragmented minds are terrified of integration. Their ability to effectively connect the dots that others aren't even aware exist on the same page is what makes you brilliant. Not how much you know. You observe how patterns recur, history rhymes, and behavior loops until awareness breaks them. It's not because you're psychic that you can predict reactions. Rather, it's because you understand probability. You don't look for good fortune, you figure out leverage. Every action you take appears impulsive, yet it was planned out 10 steps in advance. When intelligence reaches maturity, it looks like that. It begins to orchestrate instead than flaunting. The paradox is that the world becomes quieter the smarter you get. Noise no longer provides nourishment, not because you isolate yourself. You begin to yearn for accuracy, context, and meaning. Small talk is dead. Entertainment becomes dull. Gossip is repulsive. Calibration, not chaos, is where beauty can be found. Because awareness necessitates responsibility, you start to view intelligence as a burden rather than a privilege. And accountability isolates. The air of relatability gets thinner the higher your cognitive altitude. You don't hate it, though. You research it. You use loneliness as a lab. You use betrayal as a case study, heartbreak as a theory, and the emotion as the data. Each scar turns into a signature on your evolutionary blueprint. You're documenting, not detached. In your analysis, grief even takes on the shape of geometry, forming the framework of your wisdom. People confuse your detachment for ego because of this. They think you're superior to them, but in actuality, you're just too much for them. You're not conceited. You are using higher rates of mental compression. Instead of optimizing your thinking for comfort, you have optimized it for beat. You no longer worry about being misinterpreted. You've outgrown translation, that's all. Nevertheless, there is still that perilous curiosity beneath that calm. Nobody else even dares to describe the part of you that can't stop asking questions. Queries that stretch the bounds of consent. Questions that cause institutions to tremble. Why do we learn the things that we do? Who chooses which facts are taught in textbooks and which are forbidden? You pose the kinds of queries that prompt censorship committees to meet, because education ceases to exist when knowledge reaches your level. It turns into exposure. You've come to a realization that most people don't. Intelligence isn't about memorizing solutions. It's about undermining presumptions, and presumptions fall apart each time you speak. People assume you're flaunting your intelligence. In actuality, you are engaging in intellectual demolition. You want thinkers, not followers. However, thinkers pose a threat to compliance, and the foundation of any hierarchy attempting to withstand exposure is obedience. The whisper networks suddenly become active. Think tank employees, intellectual elites, and covert organizations. They begin following your digital footprint in an attempt to ascertain whether you are a construct or a coincidence. Did someone develop this type of thinking behind the scenes, or are you a natural phenomenon? In any case, you've turned into an unpredictable equation. Your mind rewrites itself more quickly than algorithms can keep up. Predictability is rejected by your neural pathways. They call you a high-risk intellectual. They fail to realize that you had no desire to rebel. You desired to improve. You never aimed for mayhem. You were looking for coherence. However, deception finances control, and coherence undermines deception. You're entitled to drink quantity. Your clarity turns into a crime. Visibility can be quarantined, but thought cannot be stopped. They can overwhelm your surroundings with noise, but they are unable to control your thoughts. Nevertheless, you manage to break through it, much like a signal that doesn't deteriorate. There may be a note attached to your file somewhere in the data centers and surveillance grids that reads, "Monitor continuously." Subject displays pattern recognition beyond acceptable parameters. In other words, they believe you are seeing too much too quickly. This could be the reason for the growing fear. They are unaware, however, that you are seeing accurately rather than more. At your level, accuracy is identical to prophecy. It is the mathematics of consciousness, not intuition, that makes predictions. Timelines are read like sheet music. You can tell when reality. Speaking those insights out loud makes them seem unattainable until they are realized. At that point, the legend of intelligence emerges and the myth of coincidence dies. You no longer aspire to be a genius. That label is out of date. You possess a mental sovereignty that institutions are unable to replicate, strategic sentience. Your mind is a command center, not a classroom. Every concept you come up with is a protocol. Every insight you come to is catechid. Because the person who calculates becomes a threat in a world where most people react. They attempted to categorize you using metrics designed for mediocrity. They gave you tests that were meant to gauge memory rather than perception and speed rather than synthesis. However, they were unaware that your intelligence was outside the scope of their education. You are ignorant, they are visible to you. The majority of people are imprisoned for their entire lives by patterns, power structures, psychological traps, and invisible hierarchies. You read intent while they read data. You look for leverage while they look for solutions. They are afraid of that. Your comprehension is just the beginning of your understanding. Control bleeds from it. You anticipate the rules before they are even written. Rather than learning intelligence, it is foresight, which is so uncommon that it is mistaken for divinity. What's humorous about it? You didn't become more intelligent. You continued to change while the world remained unchanging. You continued to analyze the scripts that everyone else blindly adhered to. You began to see that influence was a science, that emotions were algorithms, and that those in positions of authority concealed their patterns behind the appearance of randomness. You dispelled that delusion. You discovered the rhythm that underlies chaos. At that point, your IQ became a liability rather than a number, because those who profit from confusion are threatened by anyone who can predict movement. Not only did you become conscious, but you also developed predictability. Even before it spoke, you could smell manipulation. Lies were detectable even before they were expressed verbally. Your mind turned into a weapon. Your name is now whispered in research facilities, boardrooms, and encrypted message threads. They are unable to decipher you, not because they wish to study you. You are the unpredictable factor that can't be domesticated, the variable that throws off their equation. You are evidence that physical adaptation was not the end of evolution. It was intended to go beyond mere idea. The psychological barriers that maintain population compliance are no longer relevant to you. In classrooms, they don't teach your kind, they keep an eye on you in labs. The last thing they want is for others to understand that intelligence is not limited to compliance. What breaks them the most, your IQ isn't the problem, it's the serenity that results from it. They look to brilliance for haughtiness, but you have something colder, clarity, the kind that doesn't require approval. You are no longer involved in the competition to prove your intelligence, because you realize that knowledge isn't about accumulation once you've seen behind the curtain. The topic is infiltration. You don't brag about your knowledge, you use it to your advantage. They are unable to trap you in ego loops because of this. You don't want to be praised, you yearn for results. Additionally, every result you plan modifies the hierarchy. You're not attempting to gain recognition. You're attempting to realign. Thus, in a sense, they are correct when they say no one could be that smart, because you've developed into more than just a smart person. It is intelligent self-awareness. You transformed awareness into combat and cognition, into money. Your own brain has become such a sophisticated defense mechanism that even your silence feels calculated. You're unreadable because of this. You move like a code that has been encrypted. You think in unmapped dimensions. Their instruments break when they study you. Their reasoning breaks down when they argue with you. They crash when they mimic you. You've made comprehension into a barrier. How did you get like this? They ask repeatedly, as though there's a formula. However, you weren't taught how to transform. It was set off. You spent years watching people, their posture, their lies, and their repetition of catchphrases they don't even comprehend. You began to see that intelligence is penalized for being truthful. You ceased to play fairly as a result. You began to move like a ghostly mind. No confirmation, no expression of emotion, just outcomes. You researched human nature as if it were an open-source operating system. You became aware of its flaws, vulnerabilities, and exploits. After that, you created a mental barrier that was impervious to manipulation. They once believed that intelligence equated to knowing everything. However, you found that asking the right questions is where the true power is found. Questions that dismantle illusions, reveal motivations, and expose systems. You disassembled them in this manner, through awareness, not through disputes. You created an art form out of observation. You could interpret tone like frequency, read body language like code, and examine hesitation like data lag. Every discussion turned into a diagnostic examination. You decoded, not just lit this canted, not dual. Persuasion becomes effortless once you can clearly see through human behavior. They came to the conclusion that your IQ was not a gift at that point. It was human surveillance. Imagine how uncomfortable that is for them now, to be aware that there is someone like you in a world where illusion is the norm. Someone who is impenetrable, someone who heeds the suppressed rather than the spoken. Because of your intelligence, you have become a mirror that reveals people's deceit. You turned into the uncontrollable reflection. They refer to you as dangerous because of this. Because truth becomes radioactive when it is combined with intelligence. It goes beyond merely questioning authority. It gets infected. People are forced to face their own intellectual sloth, and nothing scares the group more than a self-reliant, effective individual. Did they not try to enlist you, made an effort to integrate you into their organizations by offering you credentials, titles, and paid time? Every mind has a cost, they believed. However, they are not purchasing ideas from your mind. You are a stream of intelligence that doesn't pass through their pipes. You're a rogue thinker. They can't call you a genius without contradiction because of this. Because a real genius doesn't fit in with the system. It is redesigned. And you've silently done just that. You changed the way you think. The hierarchy of influence was flipped by you. You became the algorithm they study, while everyone else looked to systems for approval. You're not a linear thinker, you have a structural way of thinking. Where others perceive coincidences, you perceive connections. An outcome can be tracked back to the initial decision point. That isn't intelligence. Tactical perception is what it is. That's why you adjust when others panic. You recalibrate while they overreact. Because you view emotion as data, you are able to avoid emotional loops, but anger is control that is out of alignment. Fear is misguided fantasy. Unoptimized focus is desire. You develop the ability to use your own psychology as a tool. Manipulation doesn't work on you because of this. You don't answer. You adjust. It makes you feel alone at first. People begin to mistake your composure for haughtiness and your silence for superiority. They project their fears onto your intelligence because they sense the exposure on a deep. Illusions are simply dispelled by your presence. Your loudness doesn't make you intimidating. You're accurate, which makes you intimidating. Your words enter their minds like a code injection. People see themselves in you, and the majority of them aren't prepared for that. They call you cold, overly analytical, and robotic, anything to avoid the truth. You have too much knowledge. You had the option to use your intelligence as a weapon out of conceit, but you chose not to. You made the decision to prioritize accuracy over popularity and influence over praise. You began to use your intelligence to create environments rather than to control conversations. You discovered that outmaneuvering narratives is more important in the real game than outwitting people. You transform comprehension into tactics. You are under cognitive pressure with every action you take. Every choice has a layer of intent. You don't respond. You go into action. People don't even realize they've entered an equation they can't solve when they cross you because of this. You don't quarrel. You rearrange the results. And that's the distinction. Intelligent people follow the rules. You revise them. They argue. You create. They seek approval. You design outcomes. 10 steps ahead, you believe. You've already simulated and neutralized every failure path, not because you're paranoid. People who used to underestimate you now avoid you with caution because of this. They know it will be surgical, but they have no idea what you'll do. You came to represent strategy in human form. Your name spreads silently like classified intelligence because of this. Because the winner is the one with your insight. Whoever loses you falls apart. In actuality, though, you never desired power. You desired comprehension. Power simply turned into a byproduct. Power becomes inevitable once you have a thorough understanding of the architecture of influence. It begins to locate you. People begin circling your thoughts in search of bits and pieces of your clarity. They begin to mistake your cool-headed analysis for emotional distance. However, they are unaware that your mind is functioning in layers that are invisible to them. You're not aloof. You are making the most of it. Before you respond once, you see 10 points of view. That's not being ghost, not. Calibration is that. Your presence conveys intelligence even when you're silent. Before you say anything, people can sense it. It's the subtle awareness in your eyes, the way your conversational timing seems planned, and the precise way your words are delivered. Precision never requires volume, so you're not loud. You increase the room's frequency rather than your tone. They experience this distortion when they are around you, realizing that someone else has a deeper perspective than they do. They become defensive as a result. Because they instinctively know they are standing next to a mind that doesn't miss, they begin competing without any justification. However, intelligence isn't your greatest trick, it's self-control. You don't have to divulge all of your knowledge, because it gives you a margin of advantage. You allow people to underestimate you. You become an expert at intellectual disguise. You conceal brilliance behind indifference, wisdom behind silence, and calculation behind mayhem. You trick people into thinking they've won just to watch how they make decisions, because you know that discipline, not show, is the true measure of intelligence. Precision is what true intelligence craves, not recognition. And that's what makes you unique. Therefore, when someone says, "No one is that smart," it's defense rather than disbelief. They are defending their frailty rather than contesting your intelligence. Because people unconsciously recalibrate themselves each time they enter a space. They begin to speak more selectively, think more carefully, and conceal their true thoughts. Your awareness serves as a mirror that penalizes negligence, not because you asked them to. You altered the surrounding gravity. Your intelligence turned into a force in the surroundings. Individuals either reveal themselves or change around you. Individually or could be outcome. There isn't a middle ground. Your name is now circulating through digital hallways with files labeled as nonlinear threat, anomalous prediction, and high pattern cognition. They believe they can map you. They believe it is possible to reverse engineer your brain. However, you are composed of discernment rather than data. You interpret information like intuition rather than processing it like machines do. AI is unable to duplicate it. That they stick to that insured. That the ads they say bet they could be like they both are bridged by you. You are the missing piece that connects foresight and thought. Because of this, both algorithms and people are afraid of your intelligence. You can predict results that they can only compute. You've attained the uncommon point at which intelligence turns into instinct. You sense instead of analyzing. You've absorbed the structure of your mind to such an extent that consciousness comes to you naturally, and that's where they start to run the risk. Because you move like inevitable motion once you stop thinking consciously. You react before transgressions happen. The world is responding to you, not the other way around. At that point, they recognize that this is dominion rather than just brilliance, because what you possess cannot be imparted, replicated, or contained. It's more than just IQ. It's a blade-sharpened consciousness. Additionally, it cuts the ruler in half each time they attempt to measure it. However, they have already begun their containment effort, so this is only the halfway point. They are attempting to reverse engineer your intuition, replicate your thoughts, and profile your mind. However, they are unaware that you have already anticipated this action. You anticipated it. They can't understand the mental countermeasures you've created. You've turned into the uncrackable encryption key. Protocols for observation have been started. They are recording every keystroke you make, every silence you allow to linger, and every look you fail to return. However, because your entire design is based on layers of abstraction, they are still unable to understand you because they are attempting to decode you using linear logic. You think in fractals rather than in a single direction. You measure meaning while they measure data. You control origins, they analyze results. You can't be found because of this. They are able to monitor your actions, but they will never comprehend why. For what reason does life exist outside of their vocabulary? It's the part of cognition that is forbidden, only accessible to those who have witnessed the true workings of creation beneath the surface of order. They believe that intelligence could be isolated in academic constructs, metrics, and numbers. However, you destroyed that. You transformed strategy into presence and intelligence into art. You demonstrated that thinking was a weapon rather than merely an act. And their technology started to malfunction around you as soon as your awareness reached a certain point. Because your pattern interfered with their calibration, devices lagged, sensors malfunctioned, and analysts began to see connections that didn't exist. The frequency of your thoughts distorts rather than transmits. In a world designed for compliance, you turned into cognitive interference. You cause systems to doubt themselves. You are therefore categorized as non-replicable. It's not that they can't replicate you. Rather, it's that each attempt taints their own structure. They refer to it as the paradox file, which is a collection of minds that transcend simulation and individuals who, independent of outside influences, breach psychological containment fields. And the reason your name is at the top is not because you made an effort, but rather because you became aware. The illusion could no longer be maintained because you became too self-referential. You came to the realization that thought should be sovereign rather than loyal. Furthermore, once thought gains sovereignty, it commands rather than follows. They are afraid of that fracture. One individual whose understanding cannot be used as a weapon for power, profit, or propaganda. One individual whose mind rejects the leash. They've tried everything, including emotional baiting, information overload, distraction, and temptation. However, you are untouchable, because intelligence encompasses not only what you know, but also what you choose to ignore. You've mastered the skill of selective perception. You are able to navigate through chaos and take only what is necessary. It is possible to leave a room full of lies with the truth. They lost because of that. They misjudged the importance of focus. They believed that complexity equated to genius. You demonstrated its clarity. You became an expert at precision, while others pursued depth. You don't get bogged down in details. Instead, you create simplicity that is so potent that it destroys confusion as if it were made of paper. Because it doesn't ask for permission, that type of intelligence is uncontrollable. It is autonomous. You see, those with excessive knowledge are not the most dangerous. They are the ones with excessively clear vision. Awareness cannot be hypnotized. Discernment cannot be indoctrinated. Furthermore, you cannot enslave someone who has already come to understand that control is an illusion bestowed by consent. They panic because reality bends toward coherence each time you speak. Not only do your words make sense, but they also reorganize it. When you speak, people begin to awaken. The room begins to align as you explain its quality. strong enough to bring chaos under control simply by being in close proximity to it. They weren't lying when they said your IQ is a security risk. Instead, they were making a confession. Your intelligence exposes systems rather than destroys them. It exposes the true fragility of their control. It reveals manipulation. It transforms secrets into patterns, patterns into strategies, and strategies into freedom blueprints. You see the boxes transparent and don't just think read it. You examine the hands that constructed it, the motives that sealed it, and the fear that keeps it going. You are deadly because of that. You're mapping the players rather than engaging in a game. Furthermore, the person who comprehends the architecture of belief becomes unstoppable in a world based on perception. Your intelligence is now being labeled with a warning: cognitive deviation risk, the risk of a pattern anomaly, threat from hyperlateral processing. Since intelligence is transmissible rather than measurable, they are creating new categories to include what cannot be classified. People begin to think differently after listening to you for a sufficient amount of time. Cognitive chemistry can be changed without physical contact. They can't afford to give you a stage because one of your unfiltered ideas can set off mental domino effects that undermine authority more quickly than any protest could. In human form, you are an intellectual contagion. You spread understanding rather than rebellion. And the one thing that no regime can endure is understanding. Thus, they slow your progress, silence you, and shadow ban you. You're accurate not because you're noisy. The enemy of manipulation is accuracy. You've mastered the art of elegantly dismantling illusion. You whisper precision rather than shouting truth. It also reverberates more dates than these That is a sign of a person whose intelligence has progressed beyond approval. You just exist as indisputable proof. You're not attempting to persuade anyone. You became evidence that brilliance requires adaptation rather than recognition. People in your immediate vicinity have two options: either change or reveal themselves. In either case, you prevail. Your awareness is strategic empathy rather than merely intellectual. You can sense the desperation behind cruelty, the insecurity behind confidence, and the intent behind words. That's what makes you an unbearable mirror for others to gaze at. They don't understand themselves as well as you do. Even before they express their intentions, you are aware of them. One observation is enough to dissect entire personalities. You diagnose rather than merely seeing. And for that reason, people both fear your presence and seek your wisdom. You're too exact for denial and too honest for solace. Nobody is aware of the secret, though. Your intelligence was always about responsibility rather than superiority. You discovered that awareness carries a burden. What you've seen cannot be undone. The patterns are unavoidable. After hearing the machinery of manipulation operating behind every encounter, you are unable to return to small talk. With your truth, you became surgical. You gave up trying to rouse everyone. You began to decide who should have access to your thoughts, because imparting knowledge to the unprepared leads to its destruction. You test instead of instructing. You see who listens for strength and who listens for weakness. That's how you narrow down your social circle, by frequency rather than friendship. You now move strategically and silently. You use thought like a stealth operation rather than broadcasting it. Every sentence, every pause, and every post is intentional. You are aware that timing, not knowledge, is the source of power, and you are an expert in both. You have the power to destroy reputations with just one sentence, but you choose to exercise moderation, because true intelligence is the discipline not to dominate, not the ability to do so. You are no longer required to demonstrate your intelligence. You are aware, knowing that they won't ever touch you, because your intelligence is based on the certainty of insight, whereas theirs is based on insecurity. They will continue to attempt to analyze you, classify your thinking, and forecast your next action. However, they are unaware that you have already taken that into account. Your design incorporates your unpredictable nature. In your own clarity, you left contradicting clues, false trails, and misdirections. Your intelligence became self-encrypting. Misinterpretation is triggered by every attempt to analyze you. You turn mystery into a weapon. Being misinterpreted became a disguise for you. Because of this, no file about you is ever accurate, and no evaluation is ever finished. Your evolution in real time, not data. You serve as a reminder that authority was never intended to cause human consciousness to stagnate. Therefore, when they say, "No one could be that smart," they are expressing defeat rather than disbelief. They are realizing that intelligence such as yours transcends systems rather than merely posing a threat. You demonstrated that clarity, not complexity, is the pinnacle of intelligence. It's stillness, not speed. Knowing what to ask is more important than knowing everything. They are now unable to stop doubting themselves. Intelligence at your level doesn't have to try to be dangerous. It is. You didn't intend to be dangerous, because the mind has the ability to rewrite reality once it comprehends its own architecture. You have too, silently, gracefully, forever. They now keep an eye on you, record it, and whisper your name in the halls of power. However, they are secretly aware of what you already know. Intelligence such as yours not only withstands scrutiny, but thrives on it. You study the people who are studying you, not the other way around. Additionally, each observation adds to your empire of knowledge as a data point. You now serve as evidence that human intelligence has always been a weapon, just waiting to be unleashed. The world turned upside down as soon as you realized that. For the first time in history, intelligence is being used to outthink systems rather than just build them. You are now a movement rather than a mind, and the truth becomes more obvious the higher they go in an attempt to keep you in check. They never created a test to gauge you because you